over there is Michael Kokonis, who is actually the chair of SWA. And when she found out she was going to be here, she volunteered to videotape this. Because we have the idea that it's a good thing to spread the word. If we do a reasonably good job, then other people might be interested in seeing what we did on this presentation. And why don't you go ahead and tell us who you are. Also, I'm interested in knowing what your particular interest is in human rights, and whether you consider yourself a novice or moderately conversant or an expert. Go ahead.
I'm Jane McPherson. I'm a doctoral candidate at Florida State University, and my area is social work and human rights, both as a practitioner, working with survivors of torture, trafficking, illegal migrants, and then, of course, just working with people in poverty. But also, I teach human rights and social work, and anyway, that's my area of research as well, as human rights engagement and social work. So I'm really delighted you're doing this, and I think the class standard is really important. We haven't, so thank you.
Yeah. So we'll put you in the category of expert.
You can choose.
Okay, go ahead. Do you want to stay? Go ahead.
Okay. And my name is Michael Dover, and I'm really interested in the topic of this workshop, and I'm at Cleveland State University.
He's also a SWA member.
Okay. I'm a fallen away SWA member just because my membership lapsed and I didn't know about it, and I'm trying to get back into the game, and I will. I'm also the incoming chair of ACOSA, the Association for Community Organization and Social Administration. And I know that, and I understand that there was probably another question you were asking, but that's all the information I.
Well, what your name?
Oh, Mark Homan, how would that be?
No, that's another question. We just want to get a feel for who's in the audience.
Okay.
You know, whether you consider yourself very conversant with human rights issues, or you're a complete novice, or in the middle somewhere.
I'm probably a 7 on a scale from 1 to 10. 1 being totally unaware, and 10 being an expert.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm Kathy Lieball. I'm at the School of Social Work at the University of Connecticut. I'm also the Associate Director of our university's Human Rights Institute. And I came to human rights as a second track after finishing my PhD. So I had a long engagement post-PhD with trying to understand how the work that I was doing was about human rights. While I've done a lot of work in the Middle East, my current interest is on looking at opposition to the notion that food is a human right in the United States.
Excellent.
That's
great.
Okay.
Interesting.
Thank you. Okay, go
That's
ahead.
great. I'm David Androff, Arizona State University, assistant professor, and my human rights interest, I guess my background in human rights is really restorative justice, transitional justice, working on death penalty issues in the United States, which connected me to working on Truth and Reconciliation Commissions internationally and in the United States. But with the human rights framework, I've sort of broadened my interest to include human trafficking, and now since I've been at Arizona State, also immigration, migration, and human rights violations related to that.
Okay, so we have a group here that's very interested in this issue. It's not just somebody coming to just find out de novo. Anybody else a member of SWA? Are you a member of SWA?
No, but I feel like I'm in good company. I'm aware of SWA, and I think I was getting it confused with SWAN for a while, and I might have gone to
Swan?
once. Yeah.
Service Women's Action Network.
No, but
You
Swan.
can see the attraction.
Swan, there is a SWAN, the Social Work Action Network in Britain,
Yeah.
at which I have spoken and visited.
That's the one.
And that's the
Okay.
British SWA.
That's the one. I met them at an international
Okay.
conference, and
Yes.
I got confused, and it happens
So
to be
just
easily.
to play the idiot, what's SWA?
Okay, you're going to find out in a second. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, just a couple of housekeeping things. I'm passing around an attendance sheet mostly because we have much more material that we're going to present. And it's not really ready for distribution, but at some point it will be, and if you want it, you can get a copy of it. We have handouts. Did everybody get the handouts? We have an outline. It's a pretty good outline of what we're going to talk about, but it could change on the way. And a very nice list of resource materials, which is by no means exhaustive, but but for people who definitely didn't know about this, we wanted to get them started with something. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, this is a partner presentation, and it's sponsored by the Social Welfare Action Alliance, SWA, formerly known as the Bertha Cape and Mennonite Society. We want this to be an interactive session. We're not going to give long papers. I hope we can hold to this. Somebody needs to be a timekeeper. We have the fantasy that we're each going to speak only 10 minutes, and I hope we hold to it, but we have timekeepers. So that the group here can interact, because as we discuss this, we realized that there are a lot of thorny issues that you have to deal with in teaching human rights, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about in dialogue. So that's what we're planning to do. Hopefully, a good 45 to 60 minutes of dialogue. And we want to, after we do present, we would like the focus in the discussion to be on teaching and practice, rather than getting into the theoretical aspects of human rights. But how do you teach it? How do you do it in practice? That's really what it is. So we're each going to give some thoughts. It's going to be in 3 parts. I'm going to talk about the Social Welfare Action Alliance and how the objectives of that organization relate to the advancement of human rights and social justice. I'm going to talk about some key initiatives that have already occurred in social work to address human rights, and a quick overview of EPA 2.21, Advancing Human Rights, and then some comments on the challenges and opportunities. Joanne's going to go more into the history of the human rights movement, the usefulness of a human rights perspective in social work education, specifically the idea of economic, social, and cultural rights, and we'll end with some thoughts on human rights issues that may be used for the faculty for teaching and practice. And then Sam Coleman will dig deeper into some of the challenges in teaching human rights. And I'm particularly glad to have him because he has sort of another perspective outside of social work, and that is in anthropology. And he'll be talking about some thoughts on cultural relativism and human rights. And then after offering impressions regarding the ways in which social work instructors do address human rights, he will discuss the problems facing our profession's efforts to address economic human rights and human needs in the current socio-political and economic context. Okay, so very quickly, SWA was formed in 1986. It was actually at a CSW meeting in Chicago, and it followed the 1984, I think it was 1984, centennial meeting to celebrate the work of Bertha Cape and Mennonite, which occurred at Smith College. What happened was we put out a call for members, and 100 people joined as lifelong members. And if you have a look at that list, they are some of the foremost people in the field of social work. Now, one of the things about SWA is that its principles are based on human rights and social justice. And as I read over my notes, I said, we were in the avant-garde. We are in the avant-garde in terms of focusing on human rights and social justice, because we started doing it as soon as the organization got formed. And I went back to our archived newsletters, the BCRS reports, and I took a look to see whether there was anything in there about human rights. And lo and behold, I photocopied page after page on human rights articles from our organization. Early on, we had a collaboration with the Committee on Human Rights Inquiry, and that grew out of the Chilean inquiry. That was very, very early on. And later they were focusing on immigration rights and prisoners' rights. So we were involved in that very early. And then shortly afterwards, we developed a collaboration with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. And that has been long-standing. And that's one of the organizations I know of that uses the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as the foundation of its mission and its work. Okay, and then, just to give you an idea of some of the articles that were in the BCRS, we had a SWA national conference called Claiming Our Economic Human Rights, History, Analysis, and Action, which was completely dedicated to economic human rights. That was in 2002, so that's quite a long time ago. Was it 2007, the Toledo conference? I don't know if I have the date.
2005 Toledo.
2005, Joseph Ronco, who's one of the authors of the human rights text in social work, was our keynote speaker. So you can see pretty early on we were doing this. And so those are some of the national initiatives. And then we have one chapter in particular that continually is involved in human rights work. They run reality tours of Rochester, where they're located, to show social workers and social work students and other people what it's like for people living in these areas. So those are some of the things that we've done. But I also I wanted to mention something about what organized social work outside of SWA has done. And I think one of the significant NASW initiatives that reflects human rights was their Violence and Development Project. I don't know if any of you remember what that was, but it grew out of the Peace and Social Justice Committee, which was a member committee of NASW, and actually before SWA was a home for progressive social workers in the field. And that's where those people gravitated because they were doing work in social justice. Out of that and actually 2 SWA members have been past chairs of that committee, Fred Newton and Michael Reich. And out of that project came Dorothy Van Say's book, The Global Crisis of Violence. I don't know if any are you familiar with it, which I have used every year that I've taught advanced social work practice, because it is written from a human rights perspective, and it reframes issues in such a way that practice students can begin to see another vantage point on some of the, quotes, problems that they deal with all the time. How am I doing for time? Is anybody watching?
1 minute.
Oh, God, I'm never going to get through. Okay, so when NASW eliminated the Peace and Social Justice Committee after the death of the staff person, Eileen Kelly, there was about a 6-year effort to have it restored, because this was kind of a progressive arm of NASW. This was an unsuccessful effort. It was a petition drive. But I mention it because I consider the petition drive an example of practicing human rights. It was an effort to get that committee restored in NASW. Although it was an unsuccessful effort, I noticed a sneaky little sentence in the NASW news 2 months ago about a new entity called the Department of Social Justice and Human Rights in NASW. And I called up the staff person, Mel Wilson, to find out what this was. And I don't think he really knew how it got to be, but he got to be the staff person. I won't belabor this, but we had a nice conversation. And I wanted you to know about it because it's a potential resource and a potential entity that we could try to influence. Okay. So, does everybody know what the key concepts are in the Advancing Human Rights? I think I'm not going to repeat that, but basically, I think it's a call to action, because it basically says that students should have these practice competencies, being able to advance human rights. And when I looked at it, I said, this is the side of human rights where we're interested in changing rather than just interested in interpreting what's out there. So I call it a bold initiative. One of the things that struck me in reading some of these articles in Keeper was that somebody mentioned that it was Martin Luther King, after the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, who said we are now moving into a new era, the era of human rights. So I think that we're kind of, that was quite a while ago, and we're climbing on board with that. Okay, and because of who you are, I don't have to tell you what human rights are. I think most of you know what that is. One other thing, we have
But the video might not. People watching the video might not.
Might not know what.
So maybe it's worth a 30 to 45-second foray.
Okay, well, in the EPA, it says each person, regardless of position, has basic human rights such as freedom, safety, privacy, an adequate standard of living, healthcare, education. And then it says that we have an obligation to incorporate social work practices in organizations, institutions, and society to ensure these human rights. So that's basically what it is. So I want to make a few more points. There are different perspectives on what human rights are, how they originate, and what they mean, and how they come about. In fact, in Michael Reich's new book, Handbook of Community Practice, there's a good chapter 4 on human rights and social justice, and he actually talks about 3 different perspectives. Some people look at them as they're inalienable or absolute. Some people think they emanate from laws, they sort of, it's like the idealist and the materialist point of view, they're tangible. And then in the chapter, Reich and Eifenwild talked about constructed human rights. And this is interesting because it comes out of what I consider a CO kind of position where the designing of the human rights is an interactive process among people from the ground up. So there's an element of top-down in the whole human rights thing, and there's another element that we might be interested in bottom-up. Okay, so I just want to make a couple of other remarks. I think it's very, very important in looking at human rights and teaching about human rights that we not only let students know that there are different perspectives on this, because if they're going out in the world advancing human rights, they better be able to deal with what they're up against, because there are not a lot of people who subscribe to it the same way that we do, or at least not everybody does. So we have the issue of diversity of values, which means that worldwide, those different values locally influence the look of human rights in various regions. Secondly, the issue of resources on a global basis in order to advance all these wonderful things like healthcare, housing, etc. Resources are a critical issue. And so we're practicing human rights in the context of this political environment. The other thing I want to mention, and you can go and access this talk, Michael Reich gave a very excellent keynote address at the SWA conference here in Washington, D.C., and he highlighted the fact that one of the critical issues we face right now is the increase in income inequality and a decline in the faith that government can do anything about it. We have a tremendous increase in poverty, and if you look at the context of all of this going on, fueling these changes are the rise in power of the corporate sector, extending into every aspect of our lives. And it's very critical to have an analysis of what's going on and put human rights into that backdrop. For example, I don't have to tell you people, Citizens United is one good example, and I was very much struck by the Moyers report on ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, where they have all this model legislation that they're passing around through the states, and a lot of stuff is happening at the state level that people don't know about because it's not prominent nationally. So, one more point. So it's a very important to have an analysis of what obstacles we have to elevating the place of human rights in our country. How is it that our socioeconomic system allows for encroachments on human rights, ostensibly to promote greater goods such as prosperity and profit? How do we as social workers make the connection between social and economic development? And basically, one of the big, broad challenges is that we have to offer a vision of society that values human rights and allows a dialogue on human rights and offers an alternative to the fundamentalist market framework that is currently being touted. Otherwise, our discussion will be mainly abstract.
That was 16 minutes, or 19 minutes.
Thank you, I'm sorry.
All right. Just trying to give you an idea of where you are.
I think we should go through. I mean, unless somebody has a burning question, because it all hangs together. But
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, and I can see everything you have said is provocative, and it could provoke
we would never
conversation.
get to engage. And I think you need to put it all together. And I think you need to hear Sam too,
Yes.
because he's the one who gets where the rubber hits the road.
What time is it?
No, I like to think.
2:30.
Okay.
So, in light of the group, I'm just gonna do a little bit of skipping through it so that we have the most amount of time we